Hello, everyone. Today's lecture is going to be about how to collect information for your study, how to look at scholarly sources, how to see what other people had to say about the area that you're researching. And then after collecting that information, you will write a literature review. So let me share my screen with you. Reviewing literature, what does it mean? Reviewing the research literature regarding the topic you're studying, regarding the phenomenon that you're studying, is supposed to help you conduct your own research and then contribute with your own research to our collective knowledge of human communication. How do we find relevant information? There are several ways to do this. You need to find articles. They're usually journal articles published by scholarly journals that are relevant to your research. What does it mean? If you want to study how millennials use social media, you will look online for journal articles. I will show you later how to do that, about studies that examine this phenomenon of social media use among millennials. So you're not going to look at articles about purchase habits of millennials. You are strictly looking at their social media use. You want to see what other scholars explored related to that area, what kind of data they supplied us with, and you want to find some gap in the knowledge and fill it with your research study. You need to find quality articles, so those that adhere to scholarly standards. And one of the suggestions that I have for you is use search engines such as Google Scholar and Library Database to search for journal articles related to the topic that you're examining. Look for both primary and secondary sources. What are primary sources? So if you open a journal article and start reading it, that is your primary source. But you will also see that that author of that journal article cited other studies in their research. So those other studies are secondary sources. I would urge you, when you look at a journal article and then you found that author cited other studies and you feel that there is something interesting in the studies that they cited and that it could be potentially useful for your research. So I would suggest you to go and, instead of citing that secondary source, I would suggest you to go and look at that secondary source, read that study, and see how you can use it for your own research. Scholarly versus popular articles. I usually use some popular articles when I write an introduction section for my research. I will explain what are some of the reasons for that. Scholarly articles are basically articles that go through a peer review process before publication. I mentioned this process when I was talking about ethics and politics of research. So you basically, every time you want to submit your manuscript, your research study for publication, that study will go through a blind peer review process. Other people will examine and evaluate your work, and they're going to make a decision whether your study deserves to be published or not. Scholarly articles also have these sections. They include an abstract, introduction section, literature review, method, results, discussion, and conclusions. So if you see these subheadings in a journal article, then you will actually know that that article represents a scholarly article, not a popular article. Popular articles are published without this peer review process, and they're typically published in daily or weekly magazines. So this could be articles published by the LA Times, for instance. One of the things that you will find in scholarly articles that you will not find in popular articles is also long reference lists. So that is how you can distinguish between the two. I use popular articles because, for instance, one of the studies that I will mention today is a study that I wrote about Syrian refugees. I actually mentioned that in my previous lecture, but the study, when I was searching for information, I looked at scholarly articles predominantly, but I also needed some information from popular articles about the people who were crossing borders and fleeing from Syria. So information like that you are able to find on websites such as United Nations website, or you can find that information in news articles that covered Syrian refugee crisis. So I used that, some of that for my study, and I incorporated that in the introduction section when I explained the phenomenon of Syrian refugee crisis. What is the difference between reviewing the literature and literature review? Reviewing the literature basically means going through different sources and looking at the literature item by item and trying to kind of select articles or books or popular articles that will be incorporated in your literature review. So you will be skimming through these articles, you will be reading abstracts to see what the articles are about, and then you will figure out which articles would be important for your research. You will read them thoroughly, and then after collecting all these articles, you will write literature review. So what will be incorporated in the literature review is the summary of those studies. You will look at their results section, method section, and explain briefly what those studies reveal. So that is how you're going to write a literature review. So you look at the studies, you will particularly focus on their method section and a results section, and you will write some form of a summary of what those studies were about, like what kind of information did they bring to us, what kind of data did they provide, what kind of conclusions they made. So that will be your literature review. How do you structure your literature review? So you will, many scholarly articles usually provide this historical review. So they will start with the oldest studies about the particular phenomenon, and then they will go to the most recent research before they proceed to the next section of their article, which is the method section. Another way to put together a literature review is to look at opposing articles. So you look at articles on one side of the spectrum and on the other side of the spectrum, they're conflicting in a way. So you will analyze where those research articles agree and where they disagree. And then you will tell us how are you going to fill the gap in knowledge. And finally, structure your review by topics. Honestly, this is my favorite way to structure research. I like to split it into topics, create subheadings, and within the literature review, I discuss main concepts of my research. Let me show you an example. So when I worked on this study about anxiety, uncertainty, and attitudes towards refugees from Syria, I started as somebody who embraces this approach in research that starts with the theory. So I wanted to test basically theory. So I started with the theory, and that was my general approach. You start with the theory, and then you collect data. So I started with the theory, and that theory was anxiety and uncertainty management theory. So I explained the theory in my literature review first, and then I discussed main concepts of my study. And those concepts were anxiety. So I explained the phenomenon of anxiety. I summarized research studies that contributed to research about uncertainty. Then I discussed attitudes in general, what they represent. And then I also talked about Syrian refugee crisis because I wanted to provide more context to my research study. So that is how I divided my study. So there was literature review, that heading, and then I simply discussed different concepts in my literature review before I switched to the method section. So that is one example on how you can do this. Now let's take a look at how to search for those articles that we're going to use for our literature review. So you can search, as I mentioned, through databases, and search engines. This is what I usually do. So I usually go to Google Scholar, and I think it's a great source to search for articles. So this is what I did, and I just included this screenshot of my search to show you an example on how to search for articles on Google Scholar. So I looked for articles. I wanted to explore journalists, like how journalists gather information through social media. So I wanted to explore their practice, like what kind of news do they gather through social media? So to search for previous research that examined this phenomenon, I simply typed in the search engine Google Scholar. So it's not google.com, but google.com/scholar. So I searched for journalism, social media, news gathering. So I typed in these 3 words. And then what I also did on the left-hand side, I actually wanted, because why is it that I decided to search for articles from 2010 to 2021? So what I actually wanted, because in 2010, like social media journalists started using social media more heavily to interact with audiences, collect news. At about that time. So I was thinking, let's take a look at those research studies that dated from 2010 that kind of deal with this phenomenon. And I typed in 2010. I could have even like 2000 used for 2014, but anyway, 2010 from 2022, because I wanted to get like the most recent data about journalism and news gathering via social media. So I typed that in, and these are some of the articles that popped up. So I'm going to look at those articles and see which one would be useful for my research. So journalism in the age of social media, that could be younger journalists more likely to use social media. So, some of these studies I would take a look and see which, so this is, I'm just skimming, I'm just looking at these research studies, but I'm going to pick some of them that I'm going to include in my literature review. So not all of them will be in my literature review. I will just look at them, open individual studies, look at their abstract to see what kind of data they bring to, is it something that would be really useful for my study? So we'll look at these scholarly articles, and then I would start writing, I would read them and write a literature review. How do you identify journal articles? So I just need to provide a list of some. You have links here in this PowerPoint presentation. So I wanted to provide like a few journals that are popular in the field of communications and journalism. So some of them include Communication Research, News, Media and Society, Journalism Studies, Media, Culture and Society. These journals are basically available through our library. So that's why I listed them. So you can also go and look at those journals and search for articles in your area of research there. I wanted just to emphasize that you should be aware of fake sources, what it means. Inspect authors' credentials, authors' affiliation, look at the date of publication, who is the publisher of that research. A lot of articles, a lot of journals are published by Routledge or Sage, and look at their writing style, citations, URLs. So search for such information to make sure that that article is not fake, that it is a real journal article. I wanted to show you an example of how it looks like when you open a journal article. And this is one of the studies that I published about gatekeeping theory. And I actually investigated practices that prominent media organizations use to enable user participation in storytelling. And as you can see, how do you know that the article is valid? So you can see the title, you can see on the right-hand side, Newspaper Research Journal, 2018. You can see like all other information such as DOI, and you will see who the publisher is. So there's basically a stamp, so you know that this article is, when you open it, is genuine. It is actually a published article. And to show you how to do literature review, I am if you want to read this article, I am actually going to, I'm just going to add the link for this week. And, if you want, you can read that article. You don't have to, but I just wanted to give an example of how a journal article looks like. And also, how do you summarize it? How do you include, if I want to use this article for my research study, if I want to cite this article, if I want to include it in the literature review, how do I do that? So I just wanted to give you an example. So this is just one paragraph that you can add to your literature review if you're working on a study about participatory journalism. And I just wanted to summarize this article and show you how to do that. So this is how you're going to do that. According to the study about participatory journalism, my camera is misbehaving. So according to the study about participatory journalism practices employed by 20 prominent global news sites, news organizations remain gatekeeper of the news content in a way that they're not very likely to allow users to publish their own stories on the news websites. Specifically, they're more likely to allow users to express their viewpoints about articles produced by professional journalists than to enable them to create their own stories. Furthermore, the study suggests that news organizations also allow user participation in areas that increase website traffic, such as sharing news stories on social media. So this is my summary of that research study. I wrote that research study, but if I were to create another study and I wanted to cite this research, this is how I would do that. So why is this important? I wanted to show you a couple of things. So I cited the article, and because I'm attributing information to that author, so I don't want to use this information as it was my own. It's actually, even though I'm citing myself, I'm citing like my study. So I still need to attribute this information to that study. So in parentheses, you will write the author's last name, a comma, and then the year when the article was published. The reason why I wrote P.7 here is because in this sentence, I just wanted to show you how to cite sources using APA style. So in this sentence, because I cited this study directly, I added like a page number, and then this page number is, I think it is incorrect, but I need to correct that page number. But I just wanted to give an example. Furthermore, the study suggests that news organizations also allow user participation in areas that increase website traffic, such as sharing news stories on social media. And then I also added a reference. So you will see how at the end of your article, you will provide the reference list. So this is what you're going to do at the end. So you will provide this reference. And so this is like the full title of my study, the journal where it was published, the volume, the issue, and then page numbers. And I also provided a link to this article. So this is what you're going to do for the exercise that I'm going to give you. So I'll explain that in more detail later. Also, so earlier I mentioned how you can use Google search to search for articles. So if you cannot open those articles on Google Scholar, you can look at these PACE library sources, and PACE library will allow you to find the full article. So if that article is not available as full article on Google Scholar, look at PACE library and you can find that article there. So I provided tutorials on how to use PACE library. So please go through these tutorials. They're very helpful, and they will help you learn how to use library sources, how to search for books, journal articles, and so on. So the exercise that I have for you, the example I provided on the previous slide about how to summarize a study and include that in your literature review. So I want you to do the same thing. You just need to find 2 articles on your own. So, and do this same thing, provide a summary, provide a reference, and the link to that article. So I want you to go to Google Scholar and search for 2 journal articles that are related to your research study. So please look for something that is related to your research study, because I want you to practice, and I also want you to, what you practice, to incorporate into your literature review. So search for 2 journal articles, read the articles, and write a summary of their main findings. 4 to 6 sentences per article, include a citation. So this is how a citation looks like, and the reference. So let me just go back. This is a citation. This is like the in-text citation, and this is the reference. So just remember to make a difference between those 2. So do that and post your summary. So you need to summarize both articles, and each summary should have 4 to 6 sentences, and each summary should have a citation reference, and then you will post it under Writing Literature Review. This is my reference for today. So thank you very much for listening. A literature review can be very challenging to write, but it is also very interesting, because as you read other people's studies, you will just expand your knowledge about that area, and you will see exactly where your research fits in. So you will see how you can contribute to how you can fill the gap in knowledge with your research study. So good luck, and let me know if you have any questions. Send me an email, or you can schedule a Zoom meeting with me. Thank you, and have a great week.